appointment for. I wanted to know what the tour guide said about us as they led crowds over the cracked blue slate sidewalks of Gifford Place. I wanted to know what the tourists were oohing and eyeing over when they clustered in front of our houses, looking through the present inhabitants in search of long-dead grandeur. It was a day that actually felt like autumn. The weather cool enough to wear a cute blazer, and the oak trees lining Gifford Place ablaze in gold and red. I was struck by how beautiful my neighborhood was, bathed in these warm hues that contrasted so well with the brick and brownstone exteriors. How beautiful it had always been despite decades of being ignored. Neglect had shielded us, in a way, and watching strangers stroll through in their comfortable sneakers, with Nikons hanging around their necks, felt like our walls had been breached and the horde was marching in. The tour guide, Zephyr, was pale with a brown bob and a British accent that gave her a sense of cheery authority, though it seemed like she'd just memorized some Wikipedia facts. She didn't know shit about my neighborhood, really, but she didn't need to. The tourists weren't there to hear about Mommy's community garden or the time someone left a snake and some tarot cards on Miss Candace's stoop when they thought she was talking shit about them. They didn't want an anthropological deep dive into the relationship between bodega owner and lotto enthusiast, or an oral history of stoop usage. Zephyr was just fine for them. She pointed down the tree-lined street and asked us to imagine the Brooklyn of old. I stared at the spots where I'd skinned my knees rollerblading and gotten tangled up in double Dutch ropes, but Zephyr had meant old. Cobblestone roads and horse-drawn carriages, and homes owned by the elite of the elite old. It was probably easy to do for the people on the tour. The street was quiet and almost empty, as if my neighbors had sensed the approach of the interlopers and retreated into the safety of their homes. We started to walk, the leaves crunching beneath our shoes serving as the beat under Zephyr's sing-song voice. And this is the former Gifford Medical Center, originally the Vriesendahl Sanitarium, completed in 1830 and shuttered in 2005, she said as we stepped into the street to bypass the chain-link fence surrounding the building where I was born. The architecture was still striking, even with the boarded-up windows, but I'd known it as Murdical Center, the hospital where either incompetence or ghosts would fuck you up, so I wasn't impressed. This building has recently been the center of controversy, as it's one of the proposed sites for the next Verintech Pharmaceuticals campus, Zephyr said. There have been protests by community activists who don't want the company here, despite the promise of hundreds of new jobs and a revitalization of the area. Those against the campus are also upset that an opioid research center is being placed in a community that they feel was over-policed during their own drug epidemic. It was a bit more complicated than that. My best friend, Drea, worked for the city and had been keeping me and Mommy informed of what would happen if Verintech chose our neighborhood, and none of it was good. Not for us. "These people are never satisfied," a white man with graying hair grumbled. I glared at him, and so did a few other people, but he didn't seem to care. Zephyr ignored him and ushered us on. As we stopped in front of each brownstone, she'd carefully detail the lives of the rich white people who'd lived there 100 years ago, what food they'd eaten, what kind of clothing they'd worn, the parties they'd thrown. That was all well and good, but as the tour pressed on, my frustration, my anger at being erased from my own life in so many ways I'd lost count, pushed my hand up into the air like the teacher's bane I'd been long ago, before I'd learned curiosity killed the cat. Zephyr narrowed her gaze at me for just a second, perhaps sensing my petty intentions before saying, "Yes? So, the stuff about the Vanderhoosits is cool, but the woman who lives here now was the first black female head of an engineering firm," I said peevishly. "Oh, thanks for that tidbit." She waved the tour onward and I followed, smirking, because annoying people with history they didn't want to acknowledge was kind of fun. We stopped in front of Mr. Joe's house, and Zephyr talked about some architect named Frederick Langston. "The current owner is a jazz musician who traveled all over the world playing with some of the greats," I cut in. "He gives music lessons to children now." "That's cool. Who'd he tour with?" The question came from a tall, solidly built white guy with dirty blonde hair, a heavy brow, and ridiculous cheekbones. He asked quickly, as if purposely trying to get the question in before Zephyr could talk over me. His gaze was focused, and something about the way he waited intently.